Tired of shoes that don't quite fit right? New Mexico Shoes has a solution. Introducing our custom insoles and arch supports made just for you and ready the same day right here in Albuquerque. Perfectly tailored to your feet, enjoy the comfort and support you need. And while you're here, explore a huge selection of top brands. From casual to athletic, we've got the perfect pair waiting for you. Visit NewMexicoShoes.com for hours and location details. All right, welcome back to the Writer's Block. I am your host, Journal staff writer Sean Reider. Today we had a great conversation with Auburn Athletics beat writer, for Auburn Athletics beat writer for the Opelika-Auburn News, Adam Cole. Great conversation, really gave us a great rundown on where Auburn is right now after opening with a 73-3 win over FCS Alabama A&M before last week's kind of messy and a little weird 21-14 loss to Cal at Auburn. But before we get into that, I do want to bring up one thing. I bring it up at the start of every single podcast. Jeff Grammer, my colleague, the UNM Lobo basketball beat writer, him and I have been doing Albuquerque Journal Sports Live. It is a live show that we're doing twice a week. It's available via YouTube and on X as well. You'll be able to find the live stream options there and replay options as well. We're doing one after the Auburn game this Saturday. Per usual, we've done it for the last two games as well, and then we will be doing another one after Bronco Mendenhall's press conference heading into the Fresno State game next week on Monday. Should be in the afternoon, and then the game one should be probably about 30 to 40, maybe 50 or so minutes after the game. Just kind of depends when we get done with media and find a good spot to record. But we encourage you to look out for those, maybe put some alerts on and check those out. We enjoy doing them. We enjoy some of the feedback we've gotten from listeners on them. So highly encourage you guys to tune in with any questions you might have after the game or after a press conference, and just kind of ask whatever questions you might have. But with that being said, very excited to share our conversation with Adam Cole. All right, well, today I am pleased to be joined by Adam Cole. He's an Auburn Athletics beat writer for the Opelika-Auburn News. Adam, how are we doing today, man?
Doing all right. Kind of a sleepy, rainy day on the plains, but another beautiful game week in the heat of the season, especially, I don't know, weird times out here with what happened last weekend in Jordan Hare Stadium, but certainly has plenty of people on the edge of their seats. So all things considered, doing all right.
Yeah, and you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you guys start with 5 straight home games for Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you prefer right now, or?
Oh, I mean, for me, absolutely. I love it. For everyone else, I don't know. There seems to be this ongoing conversation about how hard that is for the fans, which I still have not been able to wrap my head around, because I'm like, the fans who travel and commute, because, it's a small community, but the fans who travel and commute, like, they're going to have their spots for their RVs and parking and tailgates, and they're going to have their tickets. And so I don't know. I think I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think it's a great thing for everybody involved. But it's funny. This is the second time in 3 years that they have opened with 5 home games. They also opened with 5 and 22. So, definitely my preference, but I think I'm in the minority on that for some reason. I still haven't wrapped my head around the reason, but yeah.
Well, we'll take it. Before we get into this New Mexico matchup this weekend, obviously Auburn plays New Mexico. I think it's locally for here. I think it's 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time and all of that. It's on ESPN2. I do want to talk about one other game, another relevant home game recently. You've been on the Auburn beat since 2022. You saw Auburn kind of hit their stride on a softer pocket of the schedule last season, win 3 games in a row, and it all kind of came to this screeching halt when New Mexico State came to town. I'm just curious. I mean, what was it like covering that game and just kind of the outroar and reaction that you saw afterwards?
I remember walking down to the interview room and thinking, I will never cover a weirder game. And then 4th and 31 happened the next week, and I was like, well, that ended very quickly. But it was shocking. That was an unreal game to watch unravel. And I mean, we have a recent comparison that we can make here with the Cal game. And, the Cal game was okay. Like they have a chance, and then they'd get in their own way. And I mean, when New Mexico State came to town last year, I don't remember ever thinking they had a chance. I just remember at a certain point, Diego Pavia did Diego Pavia things, and they got up to a certain level, and it was like, good grief, this guy is legit. This guy looks like he should be, I don't know, an SEC quarterback. And now, what do you know? He's 2-0 at Vanderbilt, and they've got Jerry Kill. And that Auburn Vanderbilt game looks a lot more daunting this year than it did last year. But no, that was one of the more peculiar games I've ever watched, just simply because of, at least on paper, competition level. But it was, Auburn didn't have a chance in that game. Like, it reached a point very early on where it was like, well, if they do something miraculous, they can turn this around. But that wasn't likely. And it was really interesting for the trajectory of the program too, because it was just like you said, I mean, they hit their stride at a softer pocket of the schedule. I forget exactly the order, but it was like Vanderbilt, went to Vanderbilt, won, had Mississippi State at home, won, and then went to Arkansas. And that was one that I don't know that any of us expected them to just absolutely put a beat down on the Razorbacks in Fayetteville, but that was maybe the most shocking game of last year in terms of just what everybody was maybe expecting, like, around here. But yeah, you had 3 wins in a row. You're going into what should be, a cupcake tune-up game against the New Mexico State team that is clearly no slouch, but in theory, shouldn't have beat you. And you had a chance to go into the Iron Bowl, with 4 straight wins. And I think, like, if they had won the Iron Bowl, it would have been like their 8th win if they did win 4 straight. And so I just remember, it was shocking, because it was just like all this momentum had just been totally lost. And kind of this ongoing conversation about Hugh Freeze continues of, I know he lost to New Mexico State in his last year at Liberty. I'm trying to think of some of the other games. I don't know that there were as many at Liberty, but I know there were a couple when he was at Ole Miss too, that, like, there's just this, I don't know. I mean, so many coaches talk, in jargon about going 1-0 every week and keeping the focus on that week. And, that was the first real sign that, like, is this somebody who gets a little embroiled and caught up in the success and when things are going well, to the point where, maybe he kind of slouches a little bit. And, and now the Cal loss, it's just, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see moving forward if Hugh Freeze can, like, snap that issue that seems to follow him throughout his career. He talked about it a little bit this summer at SEC Media Days. Got asked something about playing Georgia and Alabama so close, and he brought up the New Mexico State game right off the bat and was like, he's like, it's great we can play them close, but we need to win those games. And so I guess, hasn't walked the walk just yet, but clearly, that game is something that I don't think it will ever I don't think it will ever leave him during his Auburn tenure, truthfully, especially if he never amounts to what, people hope he can be as a hire. If he gets fired, everybody's going to look back to that game. It was really like, it was a huge point, I think, in, very early in his tenure, but still huge point nonetheless. So yeah, shocking, in short, is the way to describe that one.
And it's a weird deal with that. You mentioned that Liberty game in 2022 when New Mexico State came into, Liberty's in Lynchburg, I'm pretty sure. Mm-hmm. Came into Lynchburg. And I mean, that was really, in a lot of ways, kind of the turning point for New Mexico State. I mean, that locked up, I believe, that Quick Lane Bowl appearance. And from there on out, I mean, they basically were rolling for the rest of the Jerry Kill tenure. But you did bring it up. Obviously, Auburn is coming off a 21-14 loss against Cal in Jordan Hare. Kind of a weird game overall in a lot of different ways. What were kind of your overall takeaways? I know there's one thing that a ton of fans and media are talking about right now, but what were your general takeaways from the Cal game?
I am still truthfully having a hard time wrapping my head around it, at least in terms of like, how do you summarize that? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, four interceptions, 5 turnovers. You lose the turnover battle 5-zip. At the same time, everybody is pointing at the quarterback and saying you need to make a change. But the reality is you pushed your chips, into the middle of the table on Peyton Thorne. You didn't go get a transfer quarterback. So you've either got, Hank Brown, or you've got Holden Gariner, who's a Brian Harsin holdover, or you've got freshman Walker White, who has been running the scout team. And I mean, I covered Walker when he was in high school in Little Rock, when I was covering high schools in Arkansas, and he's been a stud since he was a sophomore. Like, he's phenomenal, but he's still a freshman. But everybody wants some change to happen, and the reality is, I mean, I'm watching that game unfold, and I see on my Twitter timeline everybody pointing at Peyton Thorne, and it's like two seconds into every play, like, there's no longer a pocket. Aaron Murray did a breakdown this week, actually, of the game film. And I think the headline of it was like, Peyton Thorne is not to blame, or at least not totally. Because again, 4 interceptions is 4 interceptions. You can't really argue with that. But at the same time, like, I went back and watched that. Aaron talked a little bit about kind of the offensive line issues. But one thing too, that, like, I mean, I'm sure I've been covering football long enough. My eye is not trained in the same way that a player's is necessarily, but he kind of got into just some things in terms of like timing and routes. And I mean, this whole RPO thing is, it's been the language Hugh Freeze has spoken since he's got here, and it just seems complicated. And maybe it's not, if it's what you do for a living, but I will tell you, like, there was a lot of talk of timing on the routes, lazy route running, stuff with the running backs that I hadn't even really thought about. And, ultimately, I guess, to get into what happened instead of me trying to wrap my head around this, the reality was Cal defensively never let Auburn get into a rhythm. In the first series, Auburn had it figured out. And then after that, I'm not sure what Cal did to adjust, but they adjusted. And the reality was, too, for a whole half, I mean, Auburn's defense just didn't have an answer. And, we talked to more than one defender after the game. We talked to some of them yesterday. I asked Dorian Mousey, he's a linebacker transfer from Duke in this year. Like, I said, hey, like, some of the players were talking about just like what the switch was at the half. Like, what did you guys talk about at halftime to really ratchet it up defensively? Because I think Fernando Mendoza was like 5 of 14 after half for like 37 yards. And, he looked untouchable in the first half. And he literally said it was just about mindset and aggressiveness. And I was like, there was no X and O adjustment to that. Like, it was just, you guys weren't doing your job and you needed to do the job better or more intensely. And he was like, yeah. And so, that's people are talking about that as a positive sign, at least that the defense adjusted. But the reality is, I mean, you've got this big question that just haunted Auburn through year one of Hugh Freeze, which is like, what's got to happen to make this offense work? And it's like, you thought after, granted FCS team, you thought after the Alabama A&M game, like, oh, okay, like, this is real. They've made progress. And then it's just like everything for like, got to be the third time in less than 2 full seasons. Like, just feels like progress is just back to 0.0, So this will be a big week for Auburn, especially because in theory, like, again, it's that kind of how I had laid it out on paper about the New Mexico State game. It's like lesser opponent coming in. The same could have been said for Cal too. I think, I know they're a Power 4 team. I know they're an Atlantic Conference powerhouse, Cal, but like, this is a really big week. They need to figure it out. They need to like just show that like they can get a monkey off their back. They're not able to do it. They haven't been able to do it to this point, and so they've got to figure it out, especially because after that, you've got Arkansas coming in. And I mean, I don't know what Arkansas is going to be this year. I think they've got plenty of potential, but I think we all saw what happened in Stillwater this weekend. And it was like, offense that's plenty capable, but at the same time, like, can't seem to get out of their own way. And then you've got Oklahoma after that. And if you go into the Oklahoma game with 2 losses, like, you are down so hard from where you thought you were going to be. I think a lot of people thought they could go into the Oklahoma game ranked in 4-0, and that ain't going to happen, but they've still got time to salvage it. This feels like an opportune week to do that. But if they couldn't get it done against Cal, they couldn't get it done against New Mexico State. Like, you just, I imagine you are holding your breath if you're in that facility, because you haven't been able to prove it against the lowest of the low, in theory, lowest of the low, I should say. Because again, I mean, we can all agree Diego Pavia is no slouch.
Diego Pavia, certainly no slouch from covering him last year. And it honestly was shocking to me Not shocking, but a tinge just like annoying week one, seeing them beat Virginia Tech, and everybody's like, wow, look at Vandy. And it's like, it's not that hard. Yeah, good players. Yeah, good coaches. It's going to work in some form or fashion. But to kind of fill in some of our viewers back home, on another quarterback, Peyton Thorne finished 14 to 27 passing for 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions, 2 of which came in the final 3 minutes, I believe. Just kind of like desperate heaves in some ways, or heaves that just didn't really work. They weren't like Hail Marys, but I mean, there's one to the sideline and one, I think, over the middle too.
And he had 2 interceptions called back.
Yes. One of them, I think it was first drive was one of them, I think.
First drive was one of them that like it bounced on the ground and like nobody saw it from any angle. And then the other one was like one of the last drives that Auburn had. He got a bailout DPI call on a Cal defender who pushed, I think, Keandre Lambert-Smith off in the end zone and caught it. But I mean, in theory, like, you know, if both those stand, I mean, 6 interceptions in a game, which is, I think his career high up to that point had been 2 in a single game. So, you know, that's something he's got to flush. And I think he's, you know, not to tangent off again, but I think he's somebody who, like, we've seen him mature even in the time he's been here. I remember after I think it was the Georgia game last year, he came in and took a few questions and was clearly upset. And I don't know what the question was that was asked, but I know he stormed out. You know, he was, I think, pretty upset. And I will say he spoke to us after the Cal loss. You know, I know he spoke after every loss last year following Georgia. So I guess New Mexico and Alabama. But, you know, he's somebody who he's always been spoken very highly of, but I feel like I've watched him mature a little bit, at least in his demeanor and candor with the media. But I'll be really curious to see how he flushes last week, because that's got to be a hard thing to flush.
Yeah, and it like, it's weird for me in some ways too, because like I'm a Michigan State guy. Like I've watched Peyton Thorne's first college game live. Like I've seen a ton of Peyton Thorne, and the interceptions and all that has literally, it's just never really been a problem to this point that it's kind of been. And Thorne can run it. I think he had 14 rushes for 63 yards against Cal. I think that's the number that's coming into my head. But, you know, you mentioned that you had talked to him after their game and all that. I thought Hugh Freeze had some kind of interesting comments on him this week in regards to just like, hey, like, you know, we're going to have a meeting about the RPO usage. We're not going to have a big package offensively. We're going to simplify things a little bit. What were, some of your big takeaways from what Hugh Freeze said in his Monday press conference in regards to Thorne and also just kind of the performance as a whole?
Hugh has got this exceptional ability to, and part of the reason I even feel comfortable calling it out is because I don't think it happens with intent a lot. But like, you know, he said on his coach's radio show Monday night that he went back and charted everything, and he thought his coaching staff only had one like missed call, like one thing that was on them. And, you know, as a coach, you know, I'm sure you have to get on your players in ways that I probably couldn't even fathom. But like sometimes, like, again, I don't think he means to elicit this, but sometimes after losses, things he says they feel like they have a finger pointing in a direction with him. And so I wasn't necessarily shocked at what he said this week. I was kind of shocked at, like, you know, he got asked maybe second question into the press conference Monday morning, you know, if he would consider making a change, and gives this very long-winded non-answer of, you know, it's hard for me not to start Peyton, but if things don't change, we're going to have to make a change. And, you know, by the end of it, like, he had been asked a couple more follow-ups, and, you know, I mean, he did not make it sound like an open competition this week in practice, but he said, you know, Hank Brown is going to get his reps, and these are things that Peyton's got to get adjusted. And, you know, he talked about, he said he had a sit-down meeting after Monday's press conference with Peyton and Hank Brown individually. And I think he had like 15 plays charted up in a supercut, and just straight up said, like, look, you walk me through this whole thing. I'm not going to say a word. You tell me what you see. You tell me why you did what you did for Peyton, because Hank didn't play. And he said they both took it well. And like, I'm not, you know, we've talked to both Hank and Peyton. I'm not shocked at all that those two would be able to handle like adversity or something like that well. But, you know, I will say, I mean, if push comes to shove and he does have to make a change at quarterback, I don't know what it's going to look like. because I will say, even though Peyton Thorne had the performance that he had and, couldn't seem to get the offense out of a hole, like, I just don't know that you have anybody on your roster who can operate your offense better than Peyton Thorne can. Because, I mean, there were even plays last week that were, butchered and not good. And he's still able to weave one way up the pocket and cut back another and make a 5 or 7 yard play out of it. That's one thing that, I mean, last year, I think we were all surprised at, like, just how mobile he was. I think he's the most mobile quarterback they have, maybe sans Walker White. But I don't think you're going to turn to a true freshman, yeah, I wasn't necessarily shocked at anything you said. And I think, kind of the demeanor of some of his comments, I think it's really easy for people who don't, talk to him on a week to week basis or see him regularly to hear that stuff and be like, wow, like, why would he say that? Or kind of shocked. And so, like, I think that's kind of why I point out what I initially pointed out, but, wasn't shocked, but, if push does come to shove, we'll see. Cause I don't know what the heck your offense is going to look like if Peyton Thorne ain't running it.
Yeah, and on the note of the offense, not to keep belaboring the quarterback situation and all that, but, going back to that Aaron Murray breakdown that you brought up, I haven't seen it, but I believe the title was something like, "It's not all Peyton Thorne's fault." And from what I've seen, kind of watching the game back, like, yeah, a lot was on the offensive line. I mean, the tackles, it felt like, got pretty routinely beat in some situations. I didn't think, like, the tight ends were all that amazing either, especially in some pass blocking situations as well. I think Xavier Miller, I think he's the right tackle. I believe Hugh Freeze said that, I don't know if he ruled him out or if he said that he's kind of he's unlikely to maybe play this week. And I think Cam Coleman, who's I believe a former 5-star recruit, really, really good receiver from the little I've seen from him, might be out this week too. What is kind of the injury situation kind of looking like on offense, and what are you kind of seeing afterwards?
So Hugh said Monday morning that Xavier and Cam were both questionable, but they would try to go. And then on the coach's show that has moved to Monday night, 4 hours after he talks to the media, you can tell how I feel about that. But he said that they were both doubtful. I forget. I think Xavier Too Tall. That's his nickname. Everyone calls him Too Tall. But I believe it's a hip injury. And then I think Cam had a dislocated or separated shoulder, and he said both are still going to try to go. He made it sound like Cam was less likely than Too Tall, but we'll see. And I mean, Cam went to high school up the road, covered him. He's tough enough. I'm not going to be shocked if he goes, but I know that, like, for our media viewing yesterday, like, of practice, they did mention that they were going to have to shift some stuff around on the O-line. And, like, that has been a whole saga since the off season, because they brought in Percy Lewis from Mississippi State, who was supposed to just take over the left tackle spot, and you're able to slide Dylan Wade into left guard. And Dylan's built out more like a left guard, but played left tackle all last year. So now, like, Tyler Johnson was the starting left tackle these last 2 games, a redshirt freshman, because I don't know what the lack of strides were for Percy in the offseason, but just didn't really seem to have it figured out. So now yesterday, what they ran that looked like a first team was Percy at left tackle. I think it was Tate Johnson at left guard, who is just a long time. Like, he was a Gus commit. Like, he's been here for a long time. Yeah. Yeah, there's still a couple of those, and it's just like you hear that and you're like, "Whoa!" Like, wow.
Makes me feel old. Like, golly.
Yeah, no. So Tate at left guard, Connor Liu at center, Jeremiah Wright at right guard, and then Dylan Wade all the way out at right tackle, which is just a little interesting. And it was interesting to see what's on the second string too now, because it's I mean, I think it was like Tyler was at left tackle, but then like DeAndre Carter, who was a 5-star freshman, they had at right guard, and I don't know that we've even seen him. He's gotten maybe a handful of snaps this year, but, like, they're going to be in a situation where it's like, okay, like, your offensive line couldn't figure it out last week. Well, now you're down your starting right tackle, and you've got to make this huge reshuffle, and you might be down your best receiver too. Like, I have no qualm saying that Cam Coleman is the most talented receiver in that room. And you still got Keandre, who's been great. Robert Lewis had a couple moments late last week, Georgia State transfer. And then you've got Perry Thompson and Malcolm Simmons, who are also both, blue chip freshman who made an impact in week 1. And so they've got a lot at their disposal that they didn't have a year ago in that receiver room, but not having Cam, that's pretty significant. But beyond that, that's really the biggest of kind of like the injury and health things to really know for this team this week.
And then I want to highlight one more player on the offense. It felt like watching that Cal game, both live and then watching it, on the tape afterwards. It just felt like, a couple situations and, a couple drives where I'm like, why are they not giving the ball to Jarquez Hunter? Like, why is he not getting more involved? I know they've stacked the box and some things and all that and whatever, you work that out. But in particular, I mean, like, I think he had over 900 rushing yards last year, led the team in rushing. That was a top 25 rushing team last year, really dynamic in a lot of ways, tough to stop. What is kind of the read on why they might have gone away from Hunter in the Cal game? And did Hugh Freeze talk at all about that?
So, yeah, he got asked about it and kind of went back to, he even talked about this after the Alabama A&M win because they didn't run the ball that much. And it's, the way his playbook is set up is it's so RPO heavy and you might have a run read at the start and, but like ultimately, like if they're giving you pass situations, it's like Thorne is supposed to go with pass situations. And so I think they just kind of fell into that against Cal and ultimately they should have been giving the ball to Jarquez Hunter more. And I think, it's really easy for people to sit there and, I don't know that anybody is really like, I have not heard anybody in the minority saying they shouldn't have given the ball to him more, but like, I think there was an argument to be made that like, oh, with the way the offensive line was doing, like maybe you don't hand it to him. But the reality was like, I think there was a drive like late in the third quarter where it was like they handed it to him a couple times and it was like maybe gain of 3, gain of 4. And then it's like, boom, he finds a hole and it's gain of 22. And that's Jarquez, like he's capable of doing that for you. He can run between the tackles. He's like a strong and big bodied back as much as he is fast and has breakaway speed. Like, yeah, they should have been handing the ball to him more. And you've also got Damari Alston, who's no slouch. You've got Jeremiah Cobb, who is a 5-star. I think he's a true sophomore this year, maybe redshirt freshman, but he's a dude who can move. He's probably the fastest running back in that room. And it's like, you have pieces, like hand the ball off, run it more. I was shocked they didn't do that more. And I think part of what, Freeze has talked about this week with the fact that like the offensive package is going to be a lot smaller and a lot simpler this week. Like, I think what we're all anticipating is that means you're going to actually have some design run plays where you aren't making a read that turns into a pass. And I'm curious to see, I'm just curious to see how it all branches out and kind of matriculates for that offense this week, because if they can find success in the simpler package, does it mean they go back to the more complex stuff? Like just what does it all look like? We've just had this carousel of just like offensive play calling confusion since Hugh Freeze got here. And it's like, just kind of like I said earlier, it's like, okay, you think they make a stride and it's 1 step forward and 3 steps back, as Olivia Rodrigo would say, so just, yeah, we'll see if they figure it out, but you're right. They should have been handing the ball to Jarquez more and they didn't. So, yeah.
And you touched on a little bit earlier too, in terms of talking to defensive guys after, and they said like, look, like we were better when we changed our mindset and all that. There's some dudes on this defense. I mean, Keldrick Falk was a guy I remember from last year as a true freshman. Long, huge defensive lineman that, I mean, can really make plays. I really like what I've seen from Eugene Asante as well at linebacker. I love the way he moves, love the way he can get involved in certain plays and all that. I just right now, I mean, what can we expect from this defense heading into Saturday against New Mexico?
If they don't need time to like warm up like they did in the Cal game, like if they can come out, hit the ground running, DJ Durkin's defense has been a really interesting thing to get to know this last offseason, because like at one point in fall camp, Freeze said part of the reason that he hired Durkin was because like some of the best offensive minds he's been around do a really good job of just kind of multiplicity and eye candy and having, like an RPO style offense that he's trying to run. Something that looks really creative and flamboyant, but is really easy to communicate in spite of having multiple looks and doodads and doohickeys. And he said DJ Durkin's defense is that way. Like it reminds him of the best offensive minds he's been around, because there's so many multiple looks. You can do so many different things out of it. It's aggressive, which, like I mean, I don't know. I was always a defensive guy. I like sending extra rushers and having a 3-4 defense with, the biggest defensive ends and nose tackles that you could ever have. And, the way he sets it up, like, you're going to send Eugene Asante off the edge, and stuff like that. And I mean, Eugene's a player who's built for that. I think really the front line, you touched on Keldrick, like that is the X factor, I think, for that unit. Maybe not the X factor, but like I would say that is their best unit. Cause you've got a defensive line that, like, you have Keldrick, you have, Jason Jones is a longtime guy. Bobby Jamison Travis was a JUCO guy who didn't play much last year. He's looked great. Malik Blockton is a true freshman, who has looked phenomenal to this point. But then you've also got Isaiah Rakes, Philip Bleedy, and Gage Keys, who you all brought in as transfers from Power 5 programs. So you've got a lot of depth there, and you've got a lot of guys who could, in theory, break out and be the guy. And then you have Jalen McLeod on the edge, and Jalen McLeod is a beautiful thing. He's 6'1" and not built at all like an edge rusher. He's not long, but he's just, he's just intense, and that's him. And then they brought in Keyron Crawford from Arkansas State this offseason. And he's a guy who's built more like your prototypical edge rusher, 6'4", really long wingspan, but really high production guys at the group of 5 level who, Jalen looked apart last year. I think Keyron's had moments to this point, kind of waiting to see him really break out. But I think that's probably their best unit. And I would say the biggest X factor would be just the performance of the secondary. It's young, inexperienced. Texas transfer, Jaron Thompson, he had some moments last week where, like, that was probably the biggest issue. It was just like the secondary was just giving so much space to let these Cal receivers like run the routes, and they were just untouched. And I don't know what the fear was, but they weren't pressing anything. And then eventually in the second half, they finally started pressing, but Jaron Thompson was the only one he really had a couple like breakout plays at the end of the first half. So I think he'll be a guy to kind of lead that charge for the secondary, but it's a young group, and Keontae Scott is a guy that they were banking on moving to like a boundary corner position. And he was great in like a safety, like nickelback kind of role last year, but through 2 weeks, he just, it just hasn't looked the part, so he's still acclimating, and he's a guy that they've got to get right, because beyond him, they've got 5 other scholarship cornerbacks after injuries and transfers. And I think there's only one of them other than Keontae that's an upperclassman. The rest of them are all redshirt freshmen or true freshmen or sophomores. So that's a group that, like, they need to do well this week, especially considering that, like, this is, your last chance to have a morale boosting sort of performance in theory before SEC play. But, all in all, if that defense is clicking and firing on all cylinders, I think it's one that's really aggressive and tries to get downhill and is going to give you a bunch of multiple looks. But it's, as much as it has its bright spots, it very much has its weak spots too, for sure. It's still a work in progress all in all. But I think at full potential, I think it's a really fun defense that they run. So.
Yeah, I'll kind of wrap it up with this. I mean, if you would have told me before the season that this game would have kind of the stakes that it currently has in some capacity for Auburn, I don't know if I would have been like, rolling on the floor shocked, but I definitely would have been very, very surprised. With that all in mind, the stakes, the previous history of New Mexico State, the Hugh Freeze tenure kind of going the way it's going, where he's been a madman on the recruiting trail, but just has not been able to take care of business on the field in a lot of certain respects. I mean, what is kind of your prediction for this game, and why?
That is a really good question, because I wish I could sit here and say with my full chest that, like, it is an opportunity for a bounce back game for Auburn. Absolutely. You've got, and I will say, I try not to beat the drum of environment and fanfare, because at a certain point, it's great being 6-7 and having the best environment in the country, but does it really mean anything if you're 6-7? But Auburn fans really pride themselves on that Jordan Hare experience. And I will say it is, I'm young. I haven't seen every venue in college football, but I will say it's something different when it's really rocking, and it's homecoming this week. And so you're going to have packed stands. I think they just announced a sellout. You've got all the momentum going for you for this to be like a bounce back. But the reality of it is, I think the big question that we're waiting to find out is, like, just how debilitating was that Cal loss? Is that something that you can flush after 1 week? Or is this something you're going to have to work through? I think that's going to be the big question for the offense. And I mean, yeah, the stakes are insane because if you lose that, you go into SEC play with a losing record. And, I think a lot of people who cover this team thought that, like I said, there was a chance to maybe go to Georgia at 5-0 and that ship has sailed, but there's still a chance to go 4-1, but you got to win this week. And I think, as far as direct predictions go, if I had to say anything, I think there will be some level of a bounce back, but I don't know that I can really say with my full chest that it will be a total bounce back. And, I don't know what the opening line is on the game, but I'm sure that
it opened at 24 and it's bet up to 28 at this point.
Yeah. So if I had to guess, I don't know if you're asking for a score or not, but I would say something like 27-14 Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they have moments and flashes. I think the defense would be the saving grace of it all, truthfully. But I think the offense is still going to have some kinks, even if it looks a little better. But, at this rate, it's just so weird looking at some of these Auburn games now. Cause it's like anybody's guess feels as good as mine. I don't know what to expect at this point, which is just so weird to say at week 3, but, we'll see. It's, like you said, there's more stakes than anybody could have ever imagined, and that should certainly make for something fun. So,
yeah, I mean, yeah, the stakes and kind of the drama that's been kind of going into this week from the Cal game for Auburn and all that. It's been absolutely fascinating, but I am 100% looking forward to Saturday. I'm 100% looking forward to being down in Jordan-Hare for the first time. But that was Adam Cole with the Opelika-Auburn News. Adam, thank you so much for coming on today and talking ball with us, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
All right, that was Adam Cole, Auburn Athletics beat writer for the Opelika-Auburn News. Really enjoyed talking to Adam. I've had previous interactions with Adam before. I was even on this beat, and I've always enjoyed talking with him. He does phenomenal work. So if you're looking to kind of read a little bit more into Auburn and read into anything that Hugh Freeze might have said this week, he's got some great content on their website that you can look into. With that being said, I do want to make one more plug for Albuquerque Journal Sports Live, the live show that my colleague Jeff Grammer and I do. We're going to be doing one after the Auburn game. Probably 30, 40, maybe 50 minutes after. Just depends on when we get done with media and all that. And we'll be doing one next Monday as well after Bronco Mendenhall's weekly press conference. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to drop those in the chat when we do them. They're available on YouTube and X in terms of the live streaming options and also the replay options as well. But with that all being said, really appreciate you guys tuning in, listening today. And thank you for supporting our coverage.
Thank you for joining us. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe, and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.